my pleasure to introduce Dr. Richard Reading. He has worked extensively in nonprofit organizations with wildlife management, such as the Okavango Research Institute, the Denver Zoological Foundation, which not only he was the founder and of the Department of Conservation Biology, but directed also. He worked a lot in Mongolia, which we learned about yesterday if you were here for the seminar. And currently he has a position with the Butterfly Pavilion in Westminster, Colorado, and has a bunch of cool projects coming out of there. Dr. Reading recently completed a Fulbright, where he worked at the University of Botswana and with the Okavango Research Institute and studied a number of things such as African wild dogs and vultures, which is what we're going to hear about today.
Great. Thank you. Thanks again for having me. Thanks for indulging me in taking up more of your time and talking about another place that near and dear to my heart, Botswana, and another group of animals, the vultures, that are in a lot of trouble. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the problems facing them, and then what we're doing. And it's going to be, the talk today is going to be broken up into little pieces about some of the research we're doing. Most of that research is being led by some of my grad students. So without further ado, it's a much smaller group of people. Again, when I talk about we, this is the group I'm talking about. This is our Raptors Botswana team. So we have students like Lepile. We have Glenn, who runs Raptors Botswana with me and Moses right here. We have Arjun, who's a faculty member down at University of Cape Town. Seone, who's another one of our students. Becky's another one of the students. Me. Pete, who's the foremost ornithologist in Botswana. And then some of our research team on the ground. Maluki, Bahiti, Raps, and Komotso. So I just want to give a shout out to our team because it's a great group of people doing great work out there on behalf of vultures. So the sad news is that if you look at these numbers, it's pretty sobering. The vulture declines of the last 20 years, the best numbers we can come up with are anywhere from a 70% decline in bearded vultures to 97% declines in Rappel's vultures, and most of these you're going to see are in the 90s, 80s, and 90s. So vultures across the continent of Africa are in free fall. We need to do something about it, which is why we decided to start working with vultures in Botswana. We really have 5 main vulture species. Some of the other species occur, but only sporadically. And those are these 5 here. They're all endangered or critically endangered. To give you a little bit of a kind of a place location marker here. So Botswana is a landlocked country in the center part of southern southern Africa. It's bordered by South Africa, Namibia, Zimbabwe, and Zambia, with not too far from Angola either. So it gives you an idea where it is. So these are the species. These are pictures of the species. So lapid-faced vulture is the biggest vulture in sub-Saharan Africa. It's got a pretty big wingspan, not as big as the vultures I talked about yesterday, but still pretty big. Cape vulture is just as heavy, but a slightly smaller wingspan. And the white-headed vulture, these guys are really rare, occur in low numbers. Hooded vultures and whiteback vultures. I want you to note that they're the very different morphologies of their bills, which is indicative of the way they make a living. So these guys open up carcasses. These guys are really good at ripping apart sinew and bones, where these guys are kind of the scramble competitors. And these guys with these small little bills are picking around the corners at little scraps of meat that fall out. So again, I really like looking at resource partitioning, and that's just not really part of our work, but something that I find fascinating, that all these species will persist and you'll find them at a carcass all mixed in. The big numbers you'll have are the whiteback vultures and the Cape vultures. These guys are much smaller numbers around the edges. So what are the objectives of our research? We want to understand movements, movement patterns, habitat use, nesting ecology of vultures, population trends, and then of course it's very important for us to understand sources of mortality. We wanted to look at lead toxicity because we know it's a big issue in California condors, and we were curious to see if it was a factor in vulture declines in Africa. When we first got there and brought this idea up, people thought and people told us it wasn't an issue. We didn't have to worry about it. You'll find out in my talk today, spoiler alert, that actually lead poisoning is an issue, and it's a pretty big issue. So poisoning is by far the bigger issue, and we'll talk about that too. So first, let me talk about movement patterns and habitat use. So this is Becky, one of my students at University of Cape Town, working with Arjun. So we're putting telemetry units on the vultures, and we're trying to understand where they move. So you can see these telemetry units, little backpack units. We make a backpack design. I'll show you a little closer up. So we can track their movements and we can see when they die. We put a little mortality switch in there, which is a little lead bead that goes back and forth. And when the animal stops moving, that bead stops moving. And if it doesn't move for a period of time, we know the animal's dead and we go to try to find out why. So it took us a while to figure out how to catch vultures. It wasn't as easy as, it's not as easy as you might think. It can be quite hard. We started off because in South Africa they use these walk-in cages, so we tried to do a walk-in cage. But I think the problem with that is you have to habituate the vultures to being provisioned with food. So you need a site where you can easily provision food on a regular basis, leave the cage open, and then when you want to catch the vultures, be ready to close the gates. We didn't really have that luxury of having a situation where we could do that, so this didn't work for us at all. We never caught a vulture in one of these traps. Instead, what we did is we decided to bring in a cannon net. And so here's the cannon. It's compressed air, so it's relatively safe. We're not using explosives. And it's connected to nets. And then when we decorate it and hide it, it looks like a big bush, hopefully. And the net's along the ground, and when it fires, it shoots out over the carcass. And I'm going to show you a little bit more, some video of how that operates. And some stills as well. So we put the carcass out, the vultures come in, you get a scramble for the bait, you shoot the cannon net, you catch a bunch of vultures, you pull them out of the net. So it's a pretty cool way to work. Here's, let me see if I can do it here. Give you a feel for how this cannon net works. So marabou storks, you can see this big stork are also attracted. They're also, so it works pretty well. You get a lot of vultures. Some slow-mo. So we'll catch as many as 40 vultures at a pop, and that allows us to process a lot of animals, especially important when we're putting tags on the birds so that we can, and I'll show you pictures of that, so we can get population estimates, and we can draw blood from a lot of animals to see what the prevalence of lead in the blood is. I'll talk a little bit about that. Of course, when you of course, when you put out baits, you have issues of hyenas and things like that. So we always stake down the baits because the hyena would walk away with this bait, if it possibly could. But we had some stakes pounded into the ground to keep that donkey from going anywhere. So always some of the trials and tribulations of field work, best laid plans. This hyena's like, what is going on here? Never had such a problem getting a piece of meat moving. And one more video, just to show you some of the other birds we caught. And I'll point out, butterflies are attracted to blood if you didn't know, so you often get a big flocks of butterflies at the carcass as well, which is pretty interesting. Here you can see the scramble competition that goes on among the whiteback vultures. These are the whiteback vultures. And here you can see one of our tagged vultures, number 99. So this resighting data, we can use this resighting data to get population estimates because we know using mark resighting data, we know how many animals we have marked, and we can then get estimates of populations out there. And then we can track populations over time. So once you catch them, they can get out of the net sometimes, so you got to rush in and grab them and get under the nets. Here's our vet, Dave Kenny. He used to work with us. He's retired now, pulling a bird out.
It actually kind of helps when they bundle up like that.
So there's one of the white-headed vultures, a really beautiful bird, and with Becky, the grad student who works down in Cape Town. So after we get the bird out of the net, we extract the bird from the net. What do? We put on the wing tags, so we can identify the birds at a distance. And again, this is useful for getting the population estimations. Also, we get some indication of movement. We put leg bands on, a more permanent kind of marker. We put on the backpack. You can see this design here. We developed this design from researchers who use eagles, but what we do is we spread the backpack and the chest because vultures have very big crops where they store their food, and we were worried that if we didn't do that, that it might impede their ability to store food. So we've got this great new method of ensuring that's not going to happen. We take a bunch of morphometric measurements. You can see that these units are solar powered, so we have some units that have lasted as long as 8 years, so they just keep recharging. It's amazing. The amount of data we can get from them, which is really cool. Then we draw blood. We draw blood from the bird, and later allows us to take this portable lead analysis machine, We can put the blood into the machine, and we can we can look at blood levels in those vultures, and that gives us a snapshot of recent exposure. It doesn't give you long-term exposure. To do that, you have to look at the bones, which of course would entail having to kill the animals. We take the weight and then we release them. Just a shout out to my good buddy Dave. David was one of our he was like the vulture whisperer. He was the best vulture handler, natural vulture handler I ever saw. A bushman, and he sadly got hit by a drunk driver last year and lost his life, which was really sad. So we lost a great team member there. And these are the kind of data we get. So again, we don't have big numbers on some of these things, but you can see what the take-home message from this again is just the vast distances they move. So here's Botswana. This is South Africa. Here's Lesotho. Here's Zimbabwe. You can see these are Cape vultures, how far distances they move. Just huge, vast distances. Here are hooded vultures, and this is Namibia, this is Angola, this is Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Botswana. And so you can see that these animals weren't even supposed to be going out of the very wet areas. Supposedly they were constrained to along the rivers, but you can see that the data we got shows pretty clearly that they do sometimes move away from the river. This one bird in green would make these big circles. I have no idea why, but literally circle around like this. And it's very fascinating to see those data. And you'll see with some of this, we've collared 5 birds or tagged 5 birds. You'll see some of them, like the yellow, we don't have much data, and that's because the animal died. So for some of the species that we've put backpacks on, they've died, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Similar whiteback vultures, we've only done a couple, but they move far. Here's Namibia, here's South Africa, far. And the one exception to the rule are the white-headed vultures. And they're not supposed to be in this part of Botswana, but they are in the middle of the Kalahari. And they don't, one of the most interesting things about these animals is they seem to be really, really tied to protected areas. So here's the Central Kalahari Game Reserve. It's another huge game reserve, like protected area, like the one I talked about in Mongolia. It's again 55,000 square kilometers, so 7.5 Yellowstones or something like that. These blue areas are wildlife management areas, so they're kind of protected. But you can see they really restrict their movement to the protected area. So fascinating that they don't move as far as the other vultures. Of course, when you move far, you put yourself at greater risk. And this is important for us because we know now that we have to work regionally. Not only is this important data ecologically, but these data are really important for us from a conservation perspective. And here's the lapid-faced vultures, by far our biggest sample size. That's what Becky's focusing on. So she's got 18. We've put out 18 of them, and you can see that they go all over the place. This is Mozambique, so they've gotten into Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Zambia. They almost get into Angola, Namibia, South Africa. So all over the place, and just a vast distance of thousands of kilometers that they'll travel. Here's 500 kilometers, so you can see that some of these birds are going down. For some reason, a lot of the birds go into this part of Namibia, and we're not exactly sure why. But hopefully Becky will get down in there and take a look. And this is just more recent data, so you can get a little better, a little clearer look at some of the movement patterns. So, so really, when you're doing vulture conservation, you're doing it in our case in Southern Africa. We're doing it across these different countries, and we've started to reach out to our to other nonprofit organizations, especially in Namibia and South Africa, and we're starting to collaborate pretty closely with them. Also Zimbabwe. And eventually it'd be nice to start working a little bit with Zambia and Angola and Mozambique. But for us, these 3 countries are the most important 3, Namibia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. And we have started to do collaborative work now. And we need to do collaborative conservation. Okay, so in terms of nesting ecology, we're very concerned that if the vultures are declining, is it just that they're being killed, or is it in fact that they're not reproducing as well, and that there's some factors associated with the nesting ecology? So we've done aerial surveys for birds that nest in trees. So we've done some in the Makhathari Pans and Naipan National Park. It's actually Naipan. I can't say it. Perhaps Johan can say it. No, okay. Naipan. They do a clicking sound. I can't do it. We've done some surveys in Kwai, Maremi, and up in the Linyanti, Salinda area. So this is up on the border, and these are more inland. And then we've done ground surveys in the Swapang Hills, because these are those Cape vultures, those really big vultures I talked about that are heavy, and they are actually cliff nesters. So we can survey them from the ground, so it's a little bit easier. So when we do the aerial surveys, we fly in these gyrocopters, which is a really cool way to get around. So here's one of the students, Lepile, who's doing some of the nesting studies. He's doing the aerial nesting study, and Sony's doing the ground surveys. And so we can do both, check nests and follow them over periods. So we go every month and we check to see if the egg is still there or the chick there, or if the nest has failed. Same thing with Seone. She'll go from the ground and use binoculars and spotting scopes, look across at these cliff faces, and check the nest site. She's got it all documented in photographs as well. So we've got very good, rigorous data on which nests have succeeded and which nests have failed. And here's some of the results. So we've seen in the Makharakari pans, where we have some of the older data, some really disturbing trends that we have fewer nest sites. More disturbing is we have fewer fledglings. So those are birds that are just about to leave the nest and be a successful. And one of the things I want to point out too is that it's not just that we're losing numbers of fledglings, but the rate of success for nestings has gone down. So if you look at the relative lengths of these two bars and the relative lengths of these two bars, you can see the nesting success rates have dropped dramatically. So we are indeed seeing not just the loss of birds, when we'll talk about later, through mortality, but we're seeing a decrease in reproduction of birds. So the recovery of those birds is going to be more difficult if they're not producing chicks that are making it to adulthood. So very disturbing trends indeed. And it could be indeed that some of the birds are getting some sublethal doses of poisons or lead, and that is repressing or reducing their ability to raise chicks to adulthood, or in fact the chicks have some of that poison in them and don't survive. So we need to try to understand some of that. Preliminary results, because we've just analyzed, we just finished up some of these surveys in Linyanti and Kauai. So Linyanti was the one up near the border, and it's got about a 70% decline from 2006 to 2017, whereas Kauai was stable. And I remember, I'll go back really quick to this. This is the Linyanti up here, right on the border. And in Botswana, most of the poaching that we worry about and why that's important, I'll talk about later, comes across the border. So there's not a lot of poaching within Botswana itself. It's usually from neighboring countries, especially Angolans come across this Caprivi strip of Namibia and poach, and Zimbabweans and Zambians. So it wasn't surprising to us that we have a vast decline in vultures near the border, whereas the population down here is a little more stable. So stay tuned. It's too early to tell, but the good news is there's some good news. There is some good news. Is the Cape vultures appear to be increasing in their nesting success rates as well as number of nests. So that bigger species, this is the only species that nests on cliffs that we have in Botswana, and these guys live in these big colonies along these cliff faces, and you can see they nest really close to one another. And so we need to start analyzing those data a little bit more rigorously, and then we're going to start to model nesting success. Again, you can see there's nests all right next to one another. Lots of nest sites as opposed to the tree nests. So we're modeling nesting success rates to try to understand the variables that influence the success or not success of a nest site, to see if it has to do with any of the environmental variables. And so we're going to be developing some of these models. This is some of Seone's work, where she's developed a theoretical outline of topography, nest and cliff characteristics, land uses, disturbance factors, mostly people, and looking at the Cape vultures on these nest sites, and then see how these impact the population, and then see what a preferred nest site looks like, and then try to protect those nest sites. So we're also, on nesting ecology, we're also trying to evaluate humans' attitudes and values towards the vultures in the nesting colonies. So Seone is right now collecting data, doing interviews with people to understand what they think about the vultures. We already know the preliminary results, again, are people are very favorably inclined towards vultures. So the local people do notice and note that the vultures do a service for them by cleaning up carcasses and helping stop the spread of diseases. That's a good thing, that people actually like vultures. Again, preliminary data, but I'm happy to share it. Population trends are obviously important, and we haven't started analyzing a lot of the mark resighting data, but we have done some raptor roadside counts and replicated some work that was done in the 90s. So this is Botswana, here's Namibia, again Angola, Namibia, Zimbabwe, and Zambia up here. And this is the northern part of Botswana. And you can see the roads we traveled extensively across the northern part. Again, this is mostly Becky's work, looking at population size and comparing that with the 90s, and it's pretty sobering. The results are incredibly sobering indeed. So this is a paper that's going to be coming out soon, hopefully. But you can see that the vast majority of species were seeing significant population declines over that 30-year period, or yeah, 30 years, 20-year period, sorry, 20-year period. Only 3 species showed any kind of significant increases. And so it's one interesting thing is tawny eagles seem to be increasing significantly, where other parts of the range they seem to be declining. The snake eagles seem to be doing quite well. But a lot of the critical and endangered species, the ones with the colored bars that aren't pink, are declining pretty dramatically. So again, sobering news indeed. We need to worry about more than just vultures, because all of our raptors seem to be in a population free fall. But looking more closely at the vultures, we're seeing population declines that are significant for each of the species. So again, the whiteback vultures, lapid-faced vultures, there's a lot of whiteback vultures, but they're still on a downward trajectory. Lapid-faced vultures, white-headed vultures, Cape vultures, and hooded vultures are all declining. We got these error bars are not actually accurate. I had to work with her on that, so they're quite a bit smaller than that. But anyway, with the vultures, indeed, we're seeing them continue to decline in Botswana, and or I shouldn't say continue to decline, but we are seeing that, but we're seeing the same trends that they're finding in other parts of Africa that have reported these very significant losses of animals. So why the decline? So a lot of our work has to understand what is causing vultures to die, and by far our data is showing that poisoning is the #1 threat to vultures. And there's really a couple different kinds of poisoning. So first there's incidental poisoning, so non-targeted poisoning. So this is where a rancher, for example, will have a cow that's killed by a lion, and he'll put poison in that carcass, and he's targeting the lion, of course, but he'll kill the vultures. And unfortunately, when you kill vultures, you kill a lot of vultures. So you can see here's a good example of a lot of vultures being killed, non-targeted in this case. And then there's also incidental or non-targeted poisoning through lead, which I'll talk about a little bit more. So spent lead ammunition creates a problem for condors in this country, as many of you probably know, and it creates a problem for vultures in Africa that we found that nobody knew about until we started doing our work. And now people are starting to replicate some of our work and finding the same kind of disturbing trends. It's also intentional. There's 2 kinds of intentional poisoning that go on. By far the worst kind is by poachers. So poachers who are after elephant ivory or rhino horn are poisoning vultures because the vultures act as sentinels to law enforcement. So they're circling above, and it alerts the law enforcement. In the case of Botswana, they're using their special forces now to fight anti-poaching campaigns. So when they see circling vultures, they'll go check out to make sure the carcass wasn't an elephant or a rhino. And by far the vast majority of this poisoning, remember I alluded to the fact that some of the declines that we're seeing in the nesting populations were along the border. Most of this kind of poaching for elephants and rhinos occurs on the edges of Botswana. So again, it's Zambians and Angolans primarily coming across the border, whacking elephants and rhinos, and then shooting back across the border, sometimes in helicopters, sometimes with automatic weapons. These guys are well armed, they're well coordinated, and they need the kind of response that Botswana is putting forth in terms of putting out their special forces. It's an all-out war. The second kind of intentional poisoning is when it's for what they call muti. So it's kind of witch doctors. So they want the talons and the heads for use in witch doctor traditional medicines. And that's a problem, but not as big a problem by far. Much less of a problem. We haven't seen it in Botswana as a huge problem yet. But in other parts of the range of the vultures, it is a problem, as well as other causes of decline are flying into power lines. And we've just done an assessment in Botswana, and we actually don't have great. We got our colleagues from South Africa up at some of the collaboration we're doing with the Endangered Wildlife Trust down there, helping us do some assessments of the power lines in Botswana, and they're actually not well structured to avoid power line collisions, and nobody's really looked. So we've done this assessment. We're going to publish that, but we're also going to start looking along power lines for killed raptors, which they find in bigger numbers in South Africa because they've looked, and we're worried we're going to find the same kinds of things. So with vulture mortality, again, I told you we have mortality switches. So we of the 26, this is the data through 2016, so not all the transmitters we put out, but we've lost about 27%, and most of them we're pretty sure were due to poisoning. We're not always sure. We can't we can't get to some of the vultures because they die across the border in other countries, and we don't have permits to go collect them and do assessments of why they died. But again, you can see these numbers, and these are. Keep in mind that this is a very case-select species, so it's a very slow reproducer. You know, they don't reproduce till they're 4 or 5 years old, and they reproduce at most once per year, and most of them don't even produce every single year. So they might produce a chick for 2 years and then take a year off. So it's a very, very slow reproducer. They don't recover fast. So any kind of declines of this magnitude of 25 to 50% is huge for a slow reproducer. Really, really dangerous situation. I throw this in here because we know when lions get killed that we lose vultures, and people don't always report the vultures. A lot of times they report just the lion, and there'll be dead vultures there, but they won't report it. So we know that there's more vultures dying out there, and so every number I'm giving you are kind of minimum data, minimum numbers. We've also looked at documentation. Again, we're seeing an increase in the number of poisoned vultures and the number of poisoning incidences that are being found and reported. And again, we know it's a relatively small number. Here's a good example of somebody who poisoned or killed an elephant for their ivory and then poisoned it, and you can see all the dead vultures on it. So the vultures are just ripping apart the vulture populations in all through Africa. Again, some sobering trends. You can look at these numbers, and of course, vultures poisoned by farmers. Previous to 2012, and then in the last 5 years, it's gone up, but not nearly as much as it has by poachers. So poachers, you know, from 109 to almost 800, and a lot less unknown because we're really trying to do a better job. But poison on vultures is really alarming in the rate at which numbers are increasing. And again, these are numbers we know of. So when you're talking 800 vultures, that's a huge percentage of the population and a huge impact on a very, very ecologically important animal. Poison locations, again, so there's a hot spot in the around Maun in the Okavango Delta, and then a lot around the borders, and sporadically some other places. Then I want to go back to talking about blood lead levels because it's another source of vulture decline. And here's a schematic of areas that we've collected samples. So again, we do these mass captures, and we draw blood from these animals, and then within 24 hours we have to check that blood sample for the lead elevation, the lead levels within the blood. And we had both non-hunting sites and hunting sites. And our hypothesis was that this lead poisoning was coming from spent lead ammunition. So we wanted to compare. And this paper is just about ready to come out, I think. Well, we had one paper come out where we actually found lead, and we found relatively high levels. These are high levels. This is the difference between what a lead bullet does and what a non-lead bullet does when it hits and enters an animal. And you can see these lead fragments get strewn throughout, and I'll show you a radiograph later. They get strewn throughout the animal, and it's almost impossible to avoid consuming lead if you shot that animal with lead. And so we should, as people, we should care about that because we don't want to consume lead. I guarantee you, there's no good reason to have lead. And here's a good quote from the Centers for Disease Control. The U.S. kept lowering the legal amount of lead that you can have in a human body that was thought to be okay, and now it's zero. Lead does nothing good for any kind of living creature that we know of. It's just bad. So in children or anything else, there should be no exposure. We don't want any exposure. So in comparing, we've also done this work in the vultures that I talked about last night, the Cinere's vultures, and you can see the levels are lower. In Mongolia, there's almost no lead at all. In Korea, where there's more lead, you can see higher levels of lead, and in Botswana, even higher. So looking at the data a little more deeply, we can see that levels of lead, in fact, one of this paper that we're revising right now, one of the reviewers said even we're calling 10 background, and he said 10 is way too high to be called background. That's sublethal. That's poison. So if you look, this is kind of, these guys right here are the ones that are really the background level, and all these guys have sublethal doses, and these guys these guys are the walking dead. They're the ones that have so much lead in their system that they're probably not going to survive very much longer. It's really harsh to say, but it's true. And so going back to looking at is it hunting, is it spent ammunition, or is it something else? We can compare lead levels inside and outside of the hunting season, and you can see it's significantly higher inside the hunting season, and same thing inside and outside of hunting areas. And we can break that out both ways by inside and outside of the hunting season. And so outside of the hunting season, if they're in a hunting area or not in a hunting area, it didn't really matter, but it mattered a lot if you were in a hunting season, in a hunting area during a hunting season, you had the highest lead levels, and that was very significant differences. So these are indirect evidence that suggests that indeed spent ammunition is a cause of lead and a cause for concern. Here's that radiograph I was telling you about. You can see how much lead spreads across the body. This is a deer in North America. So if you you hunt, like I've hunted, and I eat only game meat, I am now really concerned about the fact that I've probably been consuming lead my whole life, and I'm actually kind of afraid to test myself. I now want to eat only game meat that's culled by people who use bullets that are not lead, because I don't want to get lead poisoning, frankly. We also found lead in water, so 4 of 12 of tested wells had an acceptable level. But they're of lead. I don't think there is really an acceptable level, but the rest had unacceptable levels. So there is also the chance that they're getting lead from the water, and it looks like they probably are. So there's probably multiple causes of lead, but the one thing we can control better than water is the ammunition. Okay, so what's the way forward with lead? Ultimately, or the way forward with vultures in general, with lead, I think the way forward is a ban on ammunition. So there are good alternatives these days. Again, there's lead that fragments, and this is the copper bullet that doesn't fragment. There are actually other amalgamations of bullets that aren't just pure copper that have even better killing power than lead, do less damage to your barrel than lead, cost a little bit more, but we're talking on the order of 3 to 5 cents a bullet, which shouldn't impede anybody from buying lead, non-lead bullet. If you're spending $1,000 on your rifle, which is the minimum you're probably spending on your rifle, then spending another few bucks on a box of ammo shouldn't deter you from switching off, especially if you know that you might be consuming lead, which is slowly poisoning you. That's my argument. And I think it's an argument that goes a long way. One piece of good news is that all the countries that surround Botswana are signatories to the Convention on Migratory Species, CMS. It's a convention we don't learn about a lot in the US because we're really not signatories to it. But it's a convention to protect species that migrate across country boundaries. We do have, like, the Migratory Bird Species Act, and we have migratory bird conservation between Mexico, Canada, and the US. But other parts of the world have CMS. CMS requires all signatories to phase out lead ammunition by, I think it's 2020, if I'm not mistaken. So what that means is that probably the countries surrounding Botswana, and most importantly South Africa, are going to have to phase out lead ammunition. That will de facto force Botswana to phase out lead ammunition, but we're still pushing for them to ban it outright if we can get them to do so. So that would be good news. That would be good news for wildlife. Lead in the environment is not good. That's why we've taken it out of our paint. That's why we've taken it out of our gasoline. It's not good for you. It's not good for anybody. We're also, as I talked about, we're working with the Botswana Defense Force, including their special forces. So when we get a mortality signal, we'll contact special forces and tell them we have a mortality signal, especially if it's near a border area. And a lot of times they'll take us out in a helicopter. They'll go after the poachers, and we'll try to clean up the site. Clean up the site means we need to count all the animals we can find. We need to search for and try to find as many animals as we can, because you don't want to leave dead, poisoned animals lying around, because you'll get secondary poisoning, right? So that's a very dangerous situation. So we try to get all the animals, burn them, and then get rid of the ash residue as well, because we don't want that lead in the environment at all. but or the poison that they use. I'm sorry, not lead. The poison in the environment at all. And then these guys will go after the poachers themselves and try to track them. So a lot of times it's too late. Like I said, a lot of these poachers have helicopters and they go right back across the border. But it's one way. It's the only way we can really fight at the poaching level. We're not a big enough organization, and we don't have the kind of resources that the Defense Force has. So in terms of the poaching part of the problem, it's going to be these guys. We can protect breeding colonies. This has already begun. We've protected some of the breeding colonies for Cape vultures. We need to do more. Some of the colonies, those cliff nesting colonies that I talked about, there's now 2 of them that in Botswana that are protected areas, small protected areas. One of them is fenced off from human influence. There's a couple other colonies that we were debating whether or not we should try to get the government to fence them off, but they're actually so poorly known, no one knows about them, that we're thinking it's better just to be quiet about them and let the vultures do their thing, because they're kind of de facto protected. They're in really hard to reach places. And then we're trying to do the same thing with breeding colonies in nesting sites, is to expand some protected areas that don't already cover the nesting colonies in trees to protect them as well. Vulture restaurants, as I was telling a class today, it's not where you eat vultures, it's where you feed vultures. And it's a way to provide safe food. And it's they're very popular in South Africa, and we've established our first one in Botswana. We're hoping to do more. It's a way to provide safe food, in other words, clean food that's lead-free and poison-free to the vultures. So we have at least some populations that we're feeding and are going to be healthy and not poisoned, and hopefully won't have to roam so far and put themselves in harm's way, right? It also provides a great opportunity for tourism and education programs. So we bring kids to this. We built this dug-in viewing blind, and you can come and watch the vultures. Birders love this kind of stuff. They'll pay to go do it. But the kids love it too. They come and they see the vultures feeding on the carcasses, and they really get a kick out of it, and gives us a captive audience that we can talk to. And then we also have community outreach stuff. So we have a team working with communities, specifically the next generation. So we do a few different things in terms of the education outreach end of things. One thing we do is we coach. We coach for conservation. So here's a group of boys. When I was over there, I was helping coach rugby. I love rugby. It's a great game. It's one of the most popular sports in that part of the world. That and probably cricket and probably track and field are probably and football, of course, soccer. Sorry, are probably the 4 most popular sports. And so what we do is we have these captive kids. On the back of their jerseys are vulture conservation messages. They go to tournaments. We do vulture education. We bring a cannon net. We shoot it over rugby balls. So we show the kids how we catch them. They get to go under the net and pull out the rugby balls like it's a vulture. We tell them all about vultures. They learn about vultures. We have a bird with 1 wing that was hit by a car. We use that as an education animal, so we bring that out. The kids are fascinated by the vultures. And one study I was telling the class today, one study I really want to do is I want to compare the parents of these students with other adults in the community, because I swear when I talk to the parents, they know so much about vultures, it's unbelievable. And the only way that they're getting that information is from these kids. So the kids are obviously getting the information at these tournaments and at our practices, taking it home and telling their parents. So through kids is a great way to reach adults. So that's one thing we do. We go to schools and we do all kinds of programs with school kids to talk about vultures. We bring them to the vulture restaurants. We bring our ambassador bird out to show them. We also go to meetings and talk about vultures with adults, because we have to reach adults too. And we go to these things called khotlas. I can't even pronounce it well, but traditionally each Botswanan community has a khotla tree, and that's how they govern. They go to that khotla tree and they decide things. They come together and they make decisions. They often pass punishment on someone who's done something wrong, but they'll make decisions for the community, and it's a chance for us to reach them about vultures. Again, the people have been incredibly receptive, so they really do know that vultures are important. But we tell them things that they might not know. So in Southern Asia, you might know that there was a bigger vulture crisis, and maybe you don't know, but a 98% decline in vultures, where they lost almost all their vultures. And there's 3 species that are dramatically affected in India. There's almost no vultures left. And we tell them that after these vultures disappeared, what happened? The mammalian scavenger populations increased. So you got increased populations of hyenas and feral dogs. Well, I'll tell you one thing, the ranchers like vultures, but they don't like hyenas and feral dogs. And those feral dogs and hyenas spread rabies. And so there are all kinds of rabies epidemics that are breaking out in India as a result of the loss of vultures. There's also cultural impacts. Jain people who did sky burials where they put people out for vultures to feed on can no longer do that because there's not enough vultures to clean up the human carcasses. So we tell them these stories because we want them to know that we don't want to reach that stage in Africa where we've lost our vultures to the point where they're not performing their ecological services, where they're going to have to go out and start, in India now, they have to start burying carcasses. That's going to cost these guys money, time, energy, and money. And the spread of disease is going to cost them more time and money. So they get it. I think we'll have luck with that. We also are considering working with local ranchers who are already supportive of our causes. For example, we found a guy, when we put out carcasses to attract vultures, of course we don't want to use lead, so we found a rancher who uses actually steel bullets, which is not a good thing for your gun, and it's doesn't have as good killing power, but he's using, and we asked him why, and he said because he didn't want to feed his family lead. So he's a game farmer. He raises wild animals instead of cows on his farm and sells them to the local markets, which you can do in Botswana. But he harvests all of his meat with non-lead ammunition because he's afraid of what might happen to his family. And so this is the kind of guy we need, and this is the kind of guy that we're trying to reach out to say, can you go and talk to other rancher groups in your community, they call them farmers, to other farmer groups about why you don't do it, because that's the kind of person they're going to listen to more than they're going to listen to us. They're going to listen to other ranchers before they're going to listen to what I'm saying. So we're doing these kinds of education outreach programs. I think we can have an impact. Again, it all starts with the data we got from our students, which are showing some pretty serious declines in numbers, but also declines in reproduction, and pretty worrisome overall. So with that, I want to thank all the people who funded our work, a great couple, and then a bunch of organizations, and I'll take some questions if you have them. Thank you. Any questions? Yes?
So you mentioned work with the ranchers as far as using lead bullets, but what about the ones that actually poison for lion carcasses? Is that like open range, and so they're not...
Yeah, we're talking about that too. So I guess I didn't talk about that as much. I'd much rather they shoot the lion than throw poison in a carcass to try to target the lion and then kill a whole bunch of things indiscriminately, right? So if the problem lion is killed, that's bad, but it's not as bad as, and it's in some ways it's actually, if it's a repeat offender, it's probably good, but it's not as bad as if you're killing a whole bunch of vultures. So we do talk about that too. They can get the government's help. So if a lion or a wild dog or a leopard or a hyena comes and kills their livestock, the government will come and trap that animal or try to trap that animal and move it out of the area. That's not always the best thing for conservation, because often they dump that animal into a protected area where there's already a thriving population of carnivores. But there are alternatives to them dropping poison on the animal, certainly, and we're trying to encourage them to explore those ideas and those options, because they don't want to lose these vultures. So I didn't mention that, but that's definitely part of the message that we're sending to them is we can't tell them to go ahead and shoot the lion, but we can say target that animal, don't target the carcass, because we can't tell them to go break the law, which would be if they went and shot the lion. What they're supposed to do is call up the government to come and catch that animal and move it. So thanks for pointing that out. I did omit that. More questions? Yeah.
Curious about the vulture restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
How much food is put out? How many vultures typically show up? And have you seen any changes?
The vulture restaurants, the food is put out on a very regular basis. It's usually animals that die that the ranchers provide to us for free. Again, a lot of these guys are really friendly towards our idea. They want to help vultures, right? And so if their animals die of disease or something, they'll give us the carcass, or they don't know why it died, and they'll give us the carcass, and we'll put the carcass out. And so on a pretty regular basis, maybe a couple times a week, we'll be putting food out there 2 or 3 times a week. If there's a school group that we're targeting, we'll obviously do it when that school group is coming. So the vultures get to know that there's a reliable source of food, and they stay around. They don't travel as far afield. That's a good thing in our mind until we can get a handle on some of these other causes of decline, because our vultures are leaving the country, right? And they're in big jeopardy when they do so, in bigger jeopardy than even in Botswana, which is still a dangerous place for vultures right now. So they come, they eat on a pretty regular basis. It takes a while for them to get used to the idea that there's a reliable source of food, but they do it. And so I foresee that there'll be more vulture restaurants. There's a couple groups that have contacted us already about interested in setting them up. Some of them are actually people who have kind of tourist operations. And again, believe it or not, it's really popular for birders to go and they get a great look and great photos of some of these incredible birds. So vulture restaurants are they're popping up all over the place. It's not a long-term solution in my mind. But it's a stopgap action that we can do now to provide some safe food for vultures and keep at least some of them from getting into trouble. Yeah.
Is there something special about the 3 eagles that are growing in population as opposed to all the others that are going down?
Well, that's a good question. Why are the snake eagles doing better? More snakes? I don't know. I don't know we don't know the answer to that. But it's those three eagles, the 2 snake eagles, for whatever reason. I don't have a good answer for why they're actually increasing, why the other species are all declining so rapidly. Sorry.
Could the eagle just be doing better because a lot of the vultures are doing worse, so they kind of...
No, because the eagles typically, one of the surprising results was that the tawny eagles are actually increasing, because tawny eagles, a lot of the eagles that do scavenge, they get killed by the same poisons. So if they start to go to the carcasses where the vultures are, they'll die as well. And so in other parts of Africa, they're finding that indeed is the case. So I was in Kenya about a year ago for a conference, and I went out with a buddy of mine from the Peregrine Fund, and we went to a poisoning site, and we found a bunch of dead vultures and some tawny eagles that were poisoned at that site as well. So I don't know why they're doing better in Botswana. It's a darn good question, but they're definitely getting poisoned in other places along with the vultures, especially things like tawnies that are often some of the first ones in. Yeah, go ahead.
With the assumption that lead or these poisons don't degrade in the environment and they continue to be put in through shot and stuff, that if the water sources are increasingly contaminated, wouldn't you guess that there'd be accelerated decrease or declines in these populations as you continue to use lead? That these decreases you've seen over time are only going to accelerate as you put more?
It might. I don't think the lead is coming from in the water. It's coming from the spent ammunition. I think it's coming from underground sources. But I don't know for sure. I mean, the lead pellets are. It's not like lead vapor from burning leaded gasoline or things like that that gets all over the atmosphere. And a lot of people when we first started presenting our results, were suggesting that it was maybe lead on the side of the roads that left over from when there was leaded gasoline, and it's still in the environment and still causing damage. We started checking on livestock, and we're not seeing numbers. We're not seeing lead numbers at all. So I don't think that's the case. And so why these water holes that are away from livestock areas, why do they have lead is a darn good question. But some of them probably need to be shut down because some of them are artificial. Yeah.
So are there ways to actually clean those water holes or remove the lead? And what's the...
You could probably chelate them. I don't know. I've never thought about doing that, but it's probably better to close down the ones that are. So there's also arsenic contamination in some of those water sources. So between arsenic and lead, they're both pretty bad. Better just close the water hole and find a new source of water and put a water hole somewhere else and test that water first before you do it. That's probably what I would do. It's probably easier and cheaper, actually. Yeah, go ahead.
My question is about your outreach.
Okay.
So when you're talking with the kids, how candid is your team with explaining who is killing these vultures and why they're dying versus just teaching them about the ecology and engendering appreciation for vultures?
Yeah, we try to do a little bit of both, but we are honest with them that they're being poisoned and why they're being poisoned. So, a lot of the poisoning is done by poachers who are not, for the most part, Botswanans. Like I said, they're really not. They're not. But some of them are definitely kids of ranchers, and those ranchers, they do like I said, they do like the vultures. So the extent that message is getting out and back to their parents is good, right? And so we We don't sugarcoat it at all. We tell them what's going on with vultures and why it's important to conserve them. We've got a big banner on the side of the bus where the team bus rides on. It's all about vultures, and it says, "Don't poison vultures." You know, they know what's going on. So.
So earlier you had mentioned that you can only really get a snapshot of the lead exposure with blood samples for the live animals, but sort of in discerning the causation for mortality and whether it be tracked or non-tracked, have you guys been able to take bone samples and look at?
We haven't done that. No, we haven't done. Other people have done it. It's harder. We could do it at some of these poison sites. We've been talking about maybe doing that, but the concern is that at the poison sites we want to burn all those carcasses and get rid of those poisoned animals as soon as possible, and we don't necessarily want to carry around bags full of poisoned vulture body parts. So we haven't done that. When we've talked a lot about when we just find a dead carcass of a vulture, we should start collecting them and collecting the bones out of them to do it, and see what the lead levels are in that. It requires a completely new permit, so we've talked about doing that. This is more information than you need to know, but the country put in a temporary ban on new permits in February of last year, and it still hasn't been lifted. So we're not able to put in. We're grandfathered in because we already had permits to do the work we're doing here, but we wouldn't be able to apply for that kind of a permit, but we've talked about doing so until they lift that temporary ban. But we definitely want to start looking at bone. It'll really show us a lot more information about the lifelong exposure of these animals. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you been able to do any sort of like treatment for the birds that you capture that test positive for lead, or have they already been released by the time?
No, they're released. So what we do is we catch them, we process them. It's a very quick processing. So for most of the birds, the ones that we don't put the backpacks on, we don't basically, if we get a lot of birds and we're really focused on lead as opposed to backpacks, then what we do is we put wing tags on them, leg bands on them, take a feather, draw some blood, let it go. The whole process takes about 2 minutes. It actually is really, really quick. You'd be surprised. Well, a little more than 2 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. So the process is very quick. And the reason for that, of course, is if we catch 20 or 30 birds, which is a lot, or the most we've caught, I think, is 45. We want to get through them fast. And if we feel like we're not moving fast enough, we always have a vet on hand who will say, just let those birds go, and we will. And so by the time we actually go to the machine and test for lead, that bird's already gone. Yeah, we did lose one. I told the class today we did. So it looks like a pretty torturous kind of capture technique. We did lose one bird one time in the net captures, and that bird had one of our highest lead levels of any bird we've tested. So that's a bird, if we could have collected the bones, we would have, but we weren't allowed to keep it. We had to actually, so what under our current permits, if any animals die, we have to give them to the government, and that's what we did. And the government unfortunately disposed of it, but we would have loved to have the bones from that animal. But the blood lead levels on that bird were over the top of the machine's ability to read it. So we're thinking that it wasn't actually the stress of being captured in the net. It was the fact that this bird was among what I was calling the walking dead. These guys, when they have that much lead in them, they're just not going to make it. And lead, the other thing I didn't mention is we do know that lead does have, one of the secondary impacts is it will repress reproduction. So one of the reasons we are looking at reproduction and we're concerned about this drop in reproduction is maybe poison, maybe lead are actually causing a double whammy, killing birds, but also suppressing reproduction in these populations of these really case-selected species. So I forgot to mention that too. So thanks for that question. So more questions? Yeah.
With the successfulness of their nests, have you considered that it could also possibly maybe be like a disease, like a genetic disease, like with the California condors?
It could be.
A recessive trait?
The reason we don't think it is, maybe it is, maybe it's a genetic disease, I don't know. We're seeing it, as I mentioned, it's spotty where it occurs. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that we're seeing a decline in reproduction up along the borders, but not more interior to the country, suggests to me that the problem is more along those boundary areas. And maybe it's poison related more than lead related, that they're getting sublethal doses of poison that's suppressing their ability to reproduce. But I don't know. I mean, we could definitely look into that, but we haven't. We're just starting to really get enough good data on nesting ecology that we're starting to model what some of the causes may or may not be. And so as we start looking at other variables that may or may not influence nesting success, if we find that none of them do, none of the variables we're analyzing, then we start looking deeper. I saw another hand. Oh, yes.
This might have already been answered with what you kind of mentioned earlier, but out of all the captures that you did, were you ever able to assess a lot of birds? Or at least, or I guess, were you able to assess in general birds that had symptoms of lead poisoning, or was that something that?
No, we could never tell. So I think what your question is could you tell by looking at the bird if we thought it might have high lead levels? And no, we didn't notice that with the birds at all. And some of them had really high lead levels. Again, the reviewers are coming back and saying that what we were saying below 10 was background. And they're saying even that's too high. And they're probably right because it is having an impact. We got birds that are 65 higher, on that same scale. So it's from 10 to 65. And I didn't notice with those birds, I couldn't notice one bird being more lethargic, except that bird that died. And it was when we went to let it go, is when it would just kind of didn't do anything, and then kind of went under a bush, walked over and sat under a bush and lied down, and then it eventually died. And we're like, uh-oh, we killed a bird. And only later that night when we're analyzing the samples did we notice that, oh my God, and because we were curious, well, I wonder what the lead level of that one was. Well, it was off the chart.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I did hear, or I do know that some of the raptors in, I suppose, kind of the area around here, I've done a little bit of work with kind of a similar thing, but they had, some of them were eventually able to show symptoms of that, and I was wondering if it ever got to that point, but.
Yeah, I'm sure they show symptoms, but we didn't happen to notice it. And usually, to be honest, we're processing birds so quickly, I don't know that we would have noticed it even if they had, and nothing that was overtly obvious to us. And when we release them, they all generally fly right away, immediately. And so the only exception was that one bird that died. Every other bird, when we let it go, it just flies, and boom, it's gone. And literally every other bird we've ever done it with, it's amazing. They're gone. Yeah. Did you have a question, Sarah? Okay. Well, it is about 5, so maybe we should wrap up if that's okay with everyone. But thanks for listening to me, and if you want to come help in vulture conservation, we'd love to have you. Thanks.